All right, hey guys, a little overview of Islam. Some of these notes we already took, so I'm just going to go over it. Um, I did underline a few things, but if you feel like you kind of understand those points, then don't worry about it. But definitely write down things that you think are new or things that you're having a hard time remembering. All right, so we do want to remember that Islam originates in the Arabian Peninsula, what is today Saudi Arabia. And prior to Islam, Arabia was inhabited by nomadic Arabs called the Bedouins. Um, one reason why Islam spread so quickly is because of where Arabia is located, in between the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Mediterranean. So location is very important. So if you're writing an essay about the spread of Islam, definitely incorporate geography. Um, because of this geography, because it's located along these sea routes, the cities in Arabia, like Mecca, for example, are going to be large commercial cities where there's going to be a lot of trade. So Muhammad, obviously, is very important. Um, things that you want to remember is that he was a prophet, not considered to be, um, a divine person, an angel of Allah. And prior to becoming this prophet, he was a caravan manager. So he was a trader, and he came in contact with Jews and Christians. So we see the influence of Christianity in that way. He was a critic of polytheism, which was being practiced in that region. He didn't like the tribalism of the region. And, again, the idea, I think, was to unify Arabia, and that's what Islam is going to do. He also called for social justice and helping the poor. And again, his revelations from God are documented in the Quran, so we want to remember that. Um, it took him a few years to gain followers, about 3 years just to gather 30 people. Um, and initially, like Jesus, that he wasn't necessarily embraced early on in Mecca. He was rejected. His family was persecuted at times, and eventually he fled and left for Medina. But he does return 10 years later, and he does unify Mecca. So early on, there were questions about him. People didn't quite connect with him. But over time, obviously, that's going to change. Little pieces of important information. He did honor Abraham and other prophets. He had respect for Christianity. He did believe that there was an afterlife, and that salvation would help you achieve that afterlife. But he did believe that you needed to submit to Allah. And his 5 pillars are very important, right? In order to achieve salvation, one had to believe in a single God, pray 5 times, give aid to the poor, fast, and also make this pilgrimage to Mecca. So, you want to try to remember those if you're writing an essay about Islam. Great context or background would be to describe the beliefs of Islam and the 5 pillars. All right. As time goes on, especially during the Abbasid Empire, we see law emerge. Um, this is not a secular. Sorry, this is not. This is a secular world where government and law or government, religion, and law are intertwined. So as time would go on, I should say, many Islamic communities would adopt Sharia law, and this law continues today. And again, it's unique in that not every not every Muslim or community follows Sharia law. It's not necessarily widespread. So, for example, some of these laws would include behavioral requirements like not gambling, not eating pork, or drinking alcohol. Polygamy is legal, and I know Amgad mentioned this, right, where the idea was that if you're killed in battle, your wife would have help. She wouldn't be alone to take care of the family. You're going to see Sharia law today in places like Iran, Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia. And one piece of Sharia law that was, I think, important is that slavery was not the enslavement of Jews, Christians, and Muslims was not obviously encouraged. So that's a little piece of Sharia law that I think we can connect to other empires, right? Where there was slavery, but it was limited based on your religion. So it gets a little confusing. There are two different groups of Islamic people. You have Sunnis and Shia, and that split happens after Muhammad is gone. And the idea is that Sunnis believe that the first caliph after Muhammad was this Abu Bakr, who was the father-in-law of Muhammad. Um, and Sunnis are going to, or at least this caliph seized lands from the Byzantine Empire and Persia. So because of that, 90% of the Muslim world is Sunni. Shia are going to emerge, and they're going to believe that Ali, who is Muhammad's cousin, was the first caliph, the first true caliph after Muhammad. So you may not remember Abu or Ali, but just remember that they disagreed over who the first caliph was, and that Sunni populations are larger. Okay. All right. So again, a caliph is a ruler. Muhammad was the first caliph. Caliphs are very important. They are obviously religious heads. They are political leaders. They helped spread Islam. They helped spread the Arabic language. They encouraged the cultivation of cotton and other crops. Bakr, for example, spread Islam through conquest of the Byzantine and Persian empires. The caliphs did not force conversion, and that's important. I think toleration is very unique to this empire. The Mongols also were tolerant. The Persians were tolerant. We know that. The Romans were not. I think that's important. The Byzantines were not. So you want to kind of differentiate a little bit. Non-believers could practice their religion, but they had to pay taxes. And that's going to actually lead to a lot of conversion. People aren't going to want to pay taxes, so they're going to convert to Islam. So conquest was very important. It's a major factor in the spread of Islam. Islamic armies were very powerful. As we mentioned earlier, the Byzantine and Persian empires were taken over. Seizure of property was used to appease troops and make troops kind of loyal. The caliph usually headed the army in addition to being this religious leader. And those lands that were conquered were then governed by a regional governor, kind of like the Persians, right? Or even the Romans would have provincial governors. And taxation was a fundamental part of this government, right? Taking taxes, for example, an alms tax, right, to help the poor, taxes to help build roads and grow trade, build mosques. There were three groups of people in the empire. You had protected subjects like Jews and Christians. They were protected because they believed in the same prophets that, and again, it's this sharing of monotheism and this belief that Islam is the continuation of Judaism and Christianity. Those who were non-believers or polytheistic were unprotected. Unprotected in the sense that, they were, again, going to pay taxes. They were probably going to be persecuted at times, maybe not as much as, say, Jews or Christians were during the Roman era, but they're going to be discriminated against somewhat, at least early on. That'll change over time. So you have the protected and the unprotected subjects. All right, so you have three caliphates that we really want to remember. Obviously, there was the Muhammad Empire, the empire under Muhammad, which was small. There's the Rashidun Caliphate, which we didn't really talk about, but that's going to be followed by the Umayyad Caliphate, right? That's one of the caliphates you're going to want to remember. Again, a caliphate is kind of another word for an empire. And as you can see, that's when we see the Islamic Empire at its greatest. And remember, Spain, it's very important. Spain comes under the power of the Umayyad, and that's going to be the doorway into Europe, right? Because Islam grows and entrenches itself in Spain, that's right on the doorstep of France, Italy. So that's how Islam kind of, or at least maybe not Islam, but the contributions of Islamic scholars and scientists are going to make their way into Europe. All right, so there's the Umayyad Caliphate, not as large as the Roman Empire, but fairly large, right? It makes up a portion of the Roman Empire, especially here with Spain, North Africa, and obviously the Middle East. And remember, the Byzantine Empire is right around here. So the Byzantines are still there, but eventually they're going to be taken over. All right, so a little about the Umayyad dynasty. That's going to be the dynasty that emerges after the death of Ali, right around 661 CE. And you're not going to really have a caliphate. You're going to have a group of merchants or generals who will rule. The capital is Damascus. Today, Damascus is Syria. That's where we're going to see the conquest of Spain. Islam will spread into India and northern Africa. And, again, one reason why Islam spreads is because you didn't really have other competing empires that were able to kind of limit the spread. So the Byzantine Empire is weak enough where Islam is going to kind of emerge into that empire. Same with the Persian Empire. This is where we see the development of Shia political and religious beliefs. The followers of Ali are resisting the Umayyad leaders who are Sunni. So we see the emergence of, again, the Shia system. For example, how is it different? Instead of a caliph, they referred to the leader as an imam. And even today, a Shia community, their leaders are imams, not caliphs. So a little bit about the Umayyad growth into Spain. That would be around 711. And Cordoba would be the Islamic capital. Remember that because that's where you're going to see a picture of Cordoba with maybe some architecture that will be used to show the spread of Islam. So Islam does not spread into France, mostly because of a war known as the Battle of Tours. The Franks will turn the Islamic empires or armies away, and that'll limit the expansion, but not the spread of ideas. That's important. Under the Umayyad Caliphate, we're going to see a lot of prosperity. We're going to see that toleration. We're going to see an increase in trade with China and India. They're going to use Asian ships, so we see the transfer of technology. Architecture will be very common in Spain. You'll see pictures of a mosque, perhaps, that shows that, again, the spread of Islam. And also mosques and palaces and fortresses were built to kind of show the power and influence of Islam. That was done on purpose. Also, you're going to see a lot of universities and libraries emerge, especially in Cordoba. Cordoba was known for its centers of learning. All right, the Abbasid Empire, I know you guys researched this, so if you want to maybe limit some of your notes, that's fine. The Abbasid Empire makes Baghdad the capital. Remember, Baghdad is kind of the old center of the Persian Empire, and Baghdad will rival Constantinople as a major trade destination, at least early on. It will be a center of learning. You're going to see a lot of literature and books printed because of paper-making improvements. It was known as the Golden Age of Islam during this time. Persia was taken over, and that's important. We see the conquering of a region, and because of that, you're going to see the transfer of ideas and the spread of Islam. It's interesting, though, in Persia that the Persian people are not considered Arabic. They don't speak Arabic. They speak Persian, and because of that, they were actually treated pretty poorly by the Arab governors and officials and those Arabs that were now living there. And that kind of goes against the Muslim ideology of brotherhood. So as time would go on, the Persians would convert, but they were allowed to keep or maintain a lot of their language and culture. So if you go to Iran today, or even parts of Iraq, they don't speak Arabic. They speak maybe a combination of Persian and Arabic. But that old Persian culture is still there. What's the influence of Persia on Islam? We know that the Persians, going all the way back to Darius, promoted tolerance. We know that the Persians were known for their imperial governments with centralized bureaucracies, with governors and administrative officials. Remember the satraps um, would kind of help govern those provinces. They were known for collecting taxes. So a lot of that, those mechanisms politically would kind of again be copied by the Islamic governments. And Baghdad was the center of Persia, and during the early Persian civilizations, it was known as Persepolis. Also, the Persian or the Islamic universities were often modeled after Persian schools. And Avicenna is a Persian scientist who helped to influence Islamic science and medicine as well. So here's a great example of Persian culture influencing Islamic culture. All right, politically, um, the one caliph that we read about was Harun, and this is very unique in that, and I mentioned this earlier, Islamic governments were not only ruled by a caliph, but the caliph was also the religious leader, right? This is a secular society. And because of that, Islamic rulers could not withdraw their support for Islam because they were the religious leaders of the empire. Um, they could, or they would often claim a relationship with Muhammad through his uncle. So they felt like they had this tie-in to Muhammad. Um, Even when a king would emerge in an Islamic empire, the caliph still held a lot of power and influence. We see that in Iran today, where yes, Iran has a president, but their imams hold a lot of influence in political matters of Iran. We read about the judicial system or the ulama, and they would implement Islamic law, and a lot of it would be to moderate legal disputes. And we learn, right, that this judge or these courts were not, were fair. Even, the royal family would have to be held accountable, or were held accountable at times. What were some challenges the Abbasid Empire faced? Mostly invasion. Mamluks. I think this is kind of an interesting, piece of information. Mamluks were children who were purchased by Islamic rulers, and they were converted for freedom. So if they wanted their freedom, they would have to convert. Here's another example of how Islam spreads, right? Their offspring were then born Muslim, but then they could not be soldiers. So Mamluks were mostly from Egypt. One of the most famous Mamluks is Saladin. We'll learn more about him during the Crusades. Very fierce warrior who actually was fairly tolerant and known for his mercy to his enemy at times. The Mamluks were skilled soldiers, hence why they were purchased by Islamic rulers, and they were actually the only army to actually defeat the Mongols directly. So they, although they didn't necessarily, they were known, though they were a problem at times for the Abbasids, but most of them were actually, purchased as soldiers over time. The Seljuk Turks, very important, another group that would often be kind of a pain in the neck of the Islamic empires. These Turks were from mostly Central Asia, parts of what would be today Russia, or even parts of China and India. They eventually would seize Baghdad. Their ruler was known as a sultan, and as time would go on, when they did take over territory, the power of the caliph was reduced, and they were known for their attacks on the Byzantine Empire as well. Crusaders were European Christians who, I believe, around 1000 CE, traveled to Jerusalem and were at war with the Turks, with Saladin. They were even known to attack other Christians. So we're going to see, their, they also, helped weaken these Islamic empires. And the Mongols. The Mongols in 1258 would actually conquer the Abbasids. So, how did the Abbasid Empire fall? Invasion. Over time, invasion was definitely a main reason for its demise. All right, what were some other challenges for the Abbasids? As time would go on, infrastructure and population declined, tax revenue would decline. So you combine that with these invasions, and you're going to see again a weakening of this empire. Eventually, Baghdad lost influence as more and more people went further north along the Silk Roads. Fewer and fewer people were going to Baghdad, and so Constantinople was and continued to be the main trading city. Also, as more and more people were traveling by sea, they also avoided Baghdad at times. Um, so I didn't really underline anything here. I forgot to, but there are a few things here. Eventually, the central government of the Abbasids did run out of money. Very often, those regional governors didn't forward enough money to the province, from the provinces to the central government. Um, Civil wars destroyed irrigation, and that hurt the economy. Eventually, we'd have tax farmers. A tax farmer was someone who was hired to collect a fixed amount, and the remaining amounts he could basically keep. Um, the Iktwa grant was something that over time the caliph would give all political control of that tax farmer. So basically, you're seeing these provinces becoming more independent of the centralized government. So other than paying taxes, these provinces were pretty much free to rule themselves. Um, and eventually, the Abbasid army was weakened and replaced, especially the Abbasid army in Iraq. So invasion, a slowing economy, civil war, and some political corruption all helped undermine the Abbasid Empire. All right, so a very important concept is you should be able to explain how Islam spread, and very simple reasonings. Drought and trade. A lot of missionaries were merchants, and as they traveled to India, they brought Islam with them. Very often, through marriage, they would spread Islam into those communities. So they would marry a local woman, and then obviously Islam would spread along those lines. A drought in Saudi Arabia or Arabia helped or forced people out of Arabia, and they moved into Asia or into Africa to find a better life. Military conquest, obviously, the Umayyad dynasty was best known for that, especially in Spain. And tolerance, I think that attracted a lot of converts to this religion, and not to mention the tax, right? Rather than paying tax, many just converted. So try to remember those reasonings. Trade. Also, we can't underestimate the significance of trade. Not only did it spread Islam, but it led to a lot of wealth in the Islamic empires. And the main trading routes were the Silk Roads and the local seas and oceans. The coastal merchants and traders were often the wealthiest members of the community. And we see, Islam converting people in Asia through that trade, and again through marriage. These Islamic merchants would marry local Asian women, and the Chinese ships, the dhows, would be used by Islamic merchants to do a lot of that trade. And don't forget the camel. The camel is going to be a mode of transportation that's going to be adopted by Islamic traders. And there's the dhow. All right, so what are some of the achievements? We're going to do a bigger lesson on this, so I'm just going to kind of highlight a few things. It's very unique in that it's an empire that combined languages, Arabic and Persian. And again, that's going to help unite, right? So these languages are going to be accepted. They're going to be learned by both groups, and that's going to really aid in unification and communication. Kind of like how Greek and Latin were both used in the Roman Empire, right? Greek in the Eastern Roman Empire, and Latin in the more Euro-centric empire. Learning was very important. Cordoba in Spain was the center of learning, and that's going to help, springboard learning and achievement of the Islamic Empire into Europe. Traders would bring back math texts from India and paper-making techniques from China. So we see again that diffusion, right? That transfer of learning. And the translation movement, don't forget, very important. Islamic historians translated medical books, astronomy books, math and geography books from Greek Even Sanskrit and Persian, they translated those books into Arabic. So they're preserving classical things, right? Classical medical ideas and ideas on astronomy. Medical advances. Islamic doctors would obtain licenses or take exams. Obviously, that's going to be true today. The astrolabe, as we mentioned earlier, that's going to help explorers determine their latitude. Remember, initially it was used to figure out where you were so you could pray to Mecca. Al-Khwarizmi is the famous mathematician who's going to introduce us to the decimal system in algebra. And reservoirs and wells are going to be used to store water. Great examples of engineering. And you're going to see books on farming and cookbooks that are going to be used to obviously, and those ideas will be spread throughout Europe and Asia. All right, a little bit about social class. You're going to have a lot of in a community, family is very important. So kinship is going to really help tie a lot of communities together, families. So you're not going to have really a social pyramid per se, but you'd probably, I would argue that, obviously the royals or the ruling family would be on top, followed by the merchant class. Probably more prestigious than any other society. Remember, in China, the merchants were kind of looked down on, but in the Islamic world, merchants were very important. And merchants were also missionaries. Muhammad was a merchant, right? So that was a profession that was highly valued. And they were very wealthy due to trade with Asia and the Indian Ocean. But they had to be fair, and they had to give the charity to follow that path, those 5 pillars. Mosques were very important. They were used not only for prayer, but also it was a place to socialize, exchange ideas. So mosques were very important to social and cultural life. Early on, especially in Persia, as we mentioned, non-Arabs were discriminated against, but not open persecution. More discrimination, and eventually, though, that fades out, and you're going to see less and less of that over time. Slavery. Slaves were commonplace. Again, other than India, you're probably going to find slavery in most places. Slaves, Islamic empires were trading with the Franks, the Russians, Africans, and Central Asians. You couldn't enslave Muslims, Jews, and Christians. That's important. And again, slaves were often converted to Islam. Hereditary slavery did not exist. That meant if you were a slave and you had a child, that child would not be a slave. And that's important. Slave women had more rights than, in many cases, than just legal wives. Very often, slaves would run errands, they would dance, they would perform, and they would even make enough money to buy their freedom. All right, so we're going to kind of end with gender roles. Remember, before Muhammad, women were lacked pretty much all rights. Their faces were often covered. They were not allowed to study or read in the presence of a man. But Muhammad is going to raise their status, and he's going to encourage Muslims to treat their wives with love and devotion. New changes, like you could not kill a newborn girl for any reason. His first wife was educated and owned businesses, so that's going to continue that idea of a woman being educated and having a role in business. They were probably more respected and had more rights than Christian or Jewish women. They could inherit property. They could own property after marriage, inherit and retain ownership. Divorce was commonplace. They could initiate it if they could even get alimony. Birth control was acceptable, and if they had to testify in court, they were often protected. However, their testimony was only worth half that of a man, so in terms of reliability, it was believed that they were less reliable. In some communities, they would cover their faces. It's interesting, Islam in Africa was less patriarchal. Islamic merchants and missionaries would travel to Africa and kind of be shocked by this, that Islamic women were less constricted than, say, even in Arabia. And we mentioned harem politics, right? It was very often wives would compete to influence the caliph. It was not condoned, but it did happen, and we read about Kaiseran, right, the mother of Harun, who got in a little bit of hot water trying to, basically influence him to choose the next leader. All right, and finally, we're going to learn about Zubaydah. Zubaydah? Can't pronounce that. That's the wife of Harun. And she's famous for really, and here's a great example of women during this time having some influence. She was devoted to public works, and she used a lot of her own private funds to build reservoirs, especially wells to help these pilgrims on their Hajj. And she also helped build a road that would link Baghdad right here with Mecca down here. And she was also very involved in that in those harem politics, and she did help manipulate the next successor to Harun. So I remember her, Zubaydah. I couldn't find a picture of her, but she did exist. All right, Sufism is the last slide. Sufism is it's Islam, but it's very unique in that it's a little bit different. And Sufism is going to emerge in India and Persia. Sufis are going to have shaved heads. They were known for rituals and dances to unite with God. But unlike Sunnis or Shias, Sufis abstained from pleasure, and they were less focused on the study of the Quran. And Sufism emphasizes this idea of introspection, kind of meditation in a sense, and not traditional learning to grasp the truth. So the best way to explain it is it's a mystical response to the love of luxury by the Umayyad Caliphate. It's not directly like Buddhism, but I can see some similarities, right? Where they're rejecting materialism, and it's a response to traditional Islam. So again, today you're going to see Sufism in India, even in Egypt. They have been attacked by Islamic radicals in the modern era. So they are definitely a unique version of Islam, Sufism. All right, so last slide, diffusion, right? So a very common essay would be to explain the influence of Islam, right? So it could be architecture. We find Islamic architecture today in Spain and Asia. We know Cordoba was the center of learning, at least in the Umayyad dynasty, and that's going to be, that city and those intellects are going to help spread Islamic achievements and ideas to the rest of Europe. They're going to be translating those works. Remember the translation movement? We know that merchants were bringing back books from India and paper-making techniques. We know that the Islamic merchants would use the Chinese dhow. Crops from India made it all the way to Spain and Africa, crops like fruit and cotton. Again, because of the trading. And the medical, scientific, and literary innovations, again, made their way into Europe. Eventually, Europeans would adopt Arabic numerals, and the astrolabe was later used by explorers. So try to be able to articulate that, right? How did, what are the achievements of Islam, and how did these achievements spread? All right, that's it, guys.